Welcome back to Disturbing the Priest. I am your host, Brandon Battick, and we are back with a very, very special episode and special guest, host of the Funbearable podcast, lead singer of Senior Discount,
Yes.
producer of Tuesdays with Stories with Mark Norman and Joe List,
Yeah.
as well as having some of the best teeth in the game. Chuck Staton, what is up, man?
I think boldest teeth in the game, perhaps. I don't know about best, but I appreciate it, buddy. Thank you very much for having me. This is great.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. This is a very special episode too. We got a nice little studio here. Probably the first episode I've ever worn a white shirt.
I like it. You look great with a white shirt. I like the hair. You see the hair very clearly on it.
See it. I don't look like a creature of the night.
I was just in the bathroom. I saw in the shower it was mounds of hair products. I was like, that's how it keeps it that way.
Yeah,
nice.
you have to be dedicated.
Yeah,
you know?
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, but I said I did. I did say you have the best teeth in the game because you've never had like a cavity, right?
I've never had it. How do you know that?
I'm like the Nardwar of a comedy podcast.
I've never had a cavity. I don't know how. Where did you get that information?
Me and your dentist have been talking.
My dentist. Oh my god, that's funny. That's really funny. That's true. I've never had a cavity, and I still have one baby tooth in the back. It's a baby tooth, and they're like, and I was like, well, every time I go in, they do the X-rays, and they go, yeah, you have one baby tooth, and they show me on my X-rays, every tooth has a root, and there's one that doesn't have a root, and I go, well, what should I do? They go, it's fine, it's solid.
You're just not gonna pluck it.
They're like, it's great. They're like, if it falls out one day because it's there's no root, we'll bridge it, whatever. But they're like, it's doing great, and I'm like, wow, so that's pretty good.
Yeah. So, what is your secret
for my teeth?
Yeah.
Well, I got bad news. Because I asked my dentist about this. Because I brush every day. I wish I was better at flossing. I said to him, I'm like, I don't really floss. Like I'm trying to get better at it. Everyone's trying to get better at it. Mm-hmm. He goes, I got to be honest. He goes, teeth are almost all genetics. So if you have terrible teeth, even if you brush and floss all the time, they're probably still going to be terrible. And if you have great teeth, even if you don't, they're probably still going to be good. But for me, I'm like, I'm brushing, I'm flossing, I'm doing my best to just kind of stay on top of it like a regular person. But besides that, nothing special.
Well,
my teeth are crazy too. My teeth are all like pointing in different directions. It looks like a pet cemetery in here. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm like, as part of me, I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. It's part of my look. I'm a crazy person. My role on on Funbearable is kind of like the crazier one and the one who comes with bad ideas to the table and stupid. And so it's kind of works for that. But then I'm like, should I get like Invisalign or something and fix them? I don't know. I'm not sure.
I don't know, man. I think it's like one of those monkey paw scenarios, where it's like you have invincible teeth, but...
Yeah, exactly. It's a rock formation.
Yeah.
Over years, it was shaped by the wind and the sand and the rain. And now it's it's solid, but that's what it looks like.
Yeah. I'm always trying to improve my teeth game. I'm just terrified of the dentist.
Really?
It's one of my fears.
Do you go?
Yeah. I do go, because like I want to take care of my teeth. You know? But it's like, it's just like, also it's very uncanny. I feel the dentist office because I've always found it like weird how they have like a fixation on like fish.
Yeah.
You walk in, they got the fish tank, they got the fish hanging from the ceiling. The one animal without teeth.
What is it called? I don't know. Because whale have it too, right? It's like this very thin thing. It's not krill, it's something. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. Oh, really? Yeah, there's a mashing mechanism, but it's not teeth. You're right, 100%.
I've just seen on TikTok where people will stick a camera in like a fish's mouth.
Yeah.
And it's just a hole that opens up. It looks like a butthole.
You know what? Maybe whale have it and fish don't. But you're right. Whales are mammals though, so maybe it is different.
Yeah,
than
they have like
fish.
the broom stuff.
Yeah. That's right. It starts with a B. Whatever it is.
Broom?
Maybe it's broom. You think so? It does. It is broomish. Maybe you're right.
Yeah, I thought as a kid that was like the stuff on brooms were like whale teeth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then I, probably finished kindergarten.
Yeah, I was gonna say. You could tell me that. I'll believe it for the next 20 years. So
yeah. So very, very exciting, man. July 21st.
Yes.
You're doing Funbearable live.
Yes, Funbearable's 100th episode will be live on July 21st at the Comedy Connection in East Providence, Rhode Island. I'm really, really excited for it. We've been doing live performances based around our podcast for years now, because we did a podcast before Funbearable, me and my buddy Brad Rohr. We did a podcast called the Chuck and Brad Podcast, worst name in history. We had a real name, but everyone would refer to it as the Chuck and Brad Podcast. So we just said, we give in, it's the Chuck and Brad Podcast. And then we eventually had on our buddy Ray Harrington, this great stand-up comic out of Rhode Island. And he started coming on more and more and more. And I'm like, man, like, this is such a great, this is such a fun dynamic with the three of us. And Ray had a podcast called Ray Harrington Must Content, where he would have on guests every week. And he was talking to me behind the scenes and being like, I'm frustrated just because, like, I like to play in the podcast space and I like to make jokes and have callbacks and all this stuff. He goes, and if I have a new guest every week, it's hard to do that. And so we started, a while ago, we decided to end the Chuck and Brad Podcast, end Ray Harrington Must Content, and all three of us come together and do Funbearable together. So we've been doing live shows with Ray from before what Funbearable was a thing. It was myself, Brad, and Ray doing these live shows for the past, 5 or 6 years. And even though they're live podcasts, they're so bizarre and we come up with the weirdest ideas. So I'm so excited for the 100th episode of Funbearable. I really think we're going to be on, we're really trying to bring it for that show. And it's weird because we want something that's funny, but also so strange and something you'd never see anywhere else. So it's not going to be like there's a table on stage and we're sitting there and we goof around for an hour and that's the live podcast. We do we would do a bit where I was actually thinking about this the other day because I kind of forgot about it, where Brad and I came out to open a show. And what we'll do is traditionally we've done a segment of us together on stage and then a comic doing regular traditional stand-up, then another segment, then another comic, then another segment. We did a segment at the open of a show, and we were we come out and I'm like, we're so excited. We're trying to be better at comedy. So this whole segment is going to be us practicing our hosting skills. And Brad would be like, wait, hosting skills? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I thought you said roasting skills on the phone. And I was like, well, all right. Well, I'll practice my hosting skills. You practice your roasting skills. And then it would be me bringing up Brad, but giving him all these compliments and trying to build him up to the crowd. And then he'd come back at me with his roast jokes he wrote about me. And I'd go back with hosting and back with roasting. And we'll do these kind of weird bits like that. We'll do these very kind of playing with the rules of comedy on stage type of bits that are very different than a traditional podcast.
Well, I think that's how it should be. You
right?
know what I mean?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because anyone could kind of just, all right, let's just fucking just sit on stage and just have people watch us.
Yeah.
But turn it into a show. You know what I mean?
That's kind of how we felt, especially because when we started doing it, we had this audio format and starting to go to do a live show. We were like, well, we really want to make the fact that it's visual and live a part of it. So it's not just a thing that you could listen to and get the same experience. So, we've come up with a bunch of different things over the years, but we're really hoping that the 100th episode can kind of raise the bar a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm really, really excited. Yeah. And so we're trying to get the word out and get people out there. But it's myself, Brad Rohr, he's an improv guy in Rhode Island, and then Ray Harrington's killer stand-up comic from Rhode Island. He's awesome.
Definitely. Great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, Ray is great. I mean, I feel very lucky to be aligned with Brad and Ray because they're both the funniest people I've ever met to me. And from such different ends too, coming from different angles. And they're the best. They're hilarious.
Yeah, well, it's definitely exciting because just the chemistry you guys have on the podcast alone, but to take that and put it into an improv-y sketch setting,
yeah,
I think it's gonna go really well. I definitely the first episode I saw of Funbearable was with Zach.
Oh yeah, Zach Valencia.
Yeah, I've known him since he was a tadpole.
Oh yeah, he's basically still half tadpole. We found out how young he was on the podcast.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but we graduated the same year.
Oh my god,
2017, man.
God. That is so disgusting to me.
I know.
It's funny too, because I don't know if you get like this. I look at people and I can no longer tell how old they are. If someone's 27 or they're 35, I can't tell the difference between them. You know what I mean? I really can't. That's my defense.
Well, yeah, and it's for me I'm 25 going on to like 40 right now, so I
Yeah.
definitely have that. I've had like working at like a record store.
Yeah.
I have like people being like, remember like Ruthie's Inn? I'm like, that closed like 30 years before I was born.
I have a lot of that stuff. I live in Warren, Rhode Island. That's where my house is. And I live in New York as well. But in Warren, a lot of times people will bring up stuff. They're like, remember, it's exactly the same kind of thing. And I'm like, no, like, I don't remember any of this stuff. Everyone's always, I always feel like that. And it's funny, moving to Staten Island. I live in Staten Island to work in Jersey and to work in Midtown. I kind of feel the same way. It's like everyone in Staten Island, it's almost like more of a small town than you think of when you think of the boroughs of New York City. And man, oh man, does everyone talk about the old stuff? And did you ever go here? You ever go there? And I'm like, no, I moved here 2.5 years ago. No, I don't know anything,
Yeah. My grandma's from New York, and every time I tell her, like, I went, she's like, oh, did you go here? Did you go here? You go here? And it's like, nah, I don't even fucking.
You're like, all those places closed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that was not 40 years ago.
But yeah, Zach is great. He was awesome. And it's funny because he was a guy. Basically, I think Zach was in town for the Rogue Island Comedy Festival, and we were like, oh, let's get some comics on from the festival. And Ray was like, oh, I did a show with this guy Zach at some point. He's a nice guy. And he came in. None of us had met him before we started recording.
Oh, really?
And we just rolled. He fit right in with us, and he was great. He was really, really funny, really, really down to just like playing that space, and he was awesome. I was really, really impressed with him.
Yeah,
was great.
He's funny guy.
Yeah,
great comic.
Excellent. Yeah, he was great.
Yeah. So you've done quite a lot in your life. I know it all started in college. You were a film major.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I feel so bad for like film majors today because it's like, how to make a franchise sequel, the art of the film verse or whatever.
It's funny because I started making film projects probably in like 1998, 1997 when I was like, 12, something like that. And I was just doing it with my friends, and I was getting into all that stuff when Kevin Smith was getting bigger and those movies were coming out, like Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, Dogma, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And that was what I was into, is that kind of independent film where it's like, oh, we can take our own voices and angle our comedy around that and just make something. And that's what set me on that path. And then I graduated high school and I went to college, and everything has changed so much. And I've worked with Kevin Smith for years. And it's just like, yeah, like those little movies, it's like less and less and less and less and less. And it's more like studios don't want to make that kind of stuff. So there's so much less opportunity for people. But then you see people break out and you're like, oh, that's amazing. I don't know if did you see Monkey Man?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
It's Dev Patel. And he wanted to make this movie in India where it was kind of like, there's a little bit of John Wick to it, but there's a lot of Indian culture in it. And he got a $10 million budget from Netflix. And they were going to put it right on Netflix, and then Jordan Peele saw it, and they put it out in theaters. It's incredible, and it more than doubled the budget opening weekend. So they did great, but it really was a guy who's like, I got this idea, I got this aesthetic in mind. I'm going to write it, I'm going to direct it, I'm going to act in it. So you still do have that stuff, but it's so much more rare than it was 30 years ago, where it's like studios used to want to make small and mid-budget projects, and now they don't.
Yeah.
But then again, there's like the other side where, one of the things that I am lucky enough to have done is I came up with a show idea starring Mark Norman and Joe List, and it's called Hot Gay Sets. And it's a documentary series, and I pitched it to them, and I was like, this needs to be like an HBO or Netflix quality documentary. It can't just be you're hanging out in a green room. And I want to make the production really good. I want to do a lot of exterior shots, and I want to get you in different locations and use a lot of musical montage stuff and really make a TV show. And lucky for me, they said yes. Huge response, and it's behind a paywall on our Patreon, on the Tuesdays with Stories Patreon. And I think we've made 11 episodes basically. Season 1 was the first 10, and then we made another one. And they're kind of busy right now, so it's been a little bit tough to make more of them. But at the same time, and so you do get to kind of make that stuff on your own terms without any studio backing or any money coming in from like a higher entity. The only money we're using is directly from our Patreon audience. So that's also kind of there is that side of it that's good. But yeah, the actual movie making side and getting up in the studio is like, It's tough, man. I mean, I work with a couple people who are really into who are really like in the system. Like I work with the Impractical Jokers, and my buddy Brian Deschelle is kind of my guru, and he directed the TV show Comic Book Men. He directed the new show Big Little Brawlers about the Micro Wrestling Federation that was on Discovery Channel. And I worked on the sizzle reel for that too. And so he's really in the system and stuff like that. And even the Jokers, who are like incredibly successful, there's still horror stories about them trying to get stuff made. They tried to make the Impractical Jokers movie, and Warner Brothers wouldn't help them at all when they made it, which owns True TV and owned all the network that they were on at the time. Sal and Q actually did a whole podcast about the production of the movie where they laid it all out and what happened with having to do everything themselves, even at that level of success. So yeah, man, it's a crazy, crazy time, and filmmaking has changed so much since I became like, this is what I want to do. You know what I mean? It's crazy. It's outrageous.
Yeah, it's so different because like I remember I was at my grandma's house. And she's like, let's see a movie. I'm like, okay, we can see Godzilla X Kong.
I know.
Ghostbusters 4 or Planet of the Apes 7.
Yeah. I know. It's crazy. Although Planet of the Apes 7 is pretty good.
Is it?
I actually think it's more like, I think it's like even further. I think there was 5 original movies.
I don't. That was just a random
number.
I
know. I think it's like 9. I think it's 9. Yeah.
That's crazy. Well, it's like, I think what's starting to happen is because you see a lot of foreign films that are kind of getting the spotlight now.
For sure.
Because, Hollywood's so bloated where you have these kind of, in foreign, like Toho, for example, where they're giving it to like new upcoming filmmakers. They're taking chances instead of, let's have J.J. Abrams back again to ruin another franchise.
Even honestly, even with the big budget stuff like the Marvel stuff, their best stuff is when they give it to a person and they let that person do what they want and go with their vision. Like even like Black Panther was directed by Ryan Coogler, and they just kind of trusted Coogler to do whatever he wanted, and that's why it was really good. And I feel like all the ones that are good, those bigger budget movies are based on that. They let one person say, I think this is a good idea, just let me do my thing and don't interfere with it,
Yeah, well, I think it definitely, a lot of filmmakers today will go into like, if it's a risk, it's like, okay, this is going to either make or break my career, so this has to be, they put a lot of passion in it. They have a vision.
Totally.
Where today it's like, okay, a lot of the directors and filmmakers, it's like, all right, this is going to be a nice paycheck.
It's very tough. I mean, I think one of my favorite soft reboots, whatever. My favorite new versions of an old movie is the first Jurassic World. And I listened to an interview with Colin Trevorrow, who directed it. And he's like, when they hired me to do Jurassic World, which essentially is Jurassic Park 4, he's like, I was like, there should not be a Jurassic Park 4. This movie shouldn't exist. We shouldn't be making it. However, this opportunity is an opportunity I can't turn down. So let's make the movie a metaphor about making Jurassic Park 4. And that's what the whole movie is about, with the whole, like, people just want more teeth, and they make this inorganic dinosaur.
Yeah.
That's a representation of Jurassic Park, of Jurassic World. And that's why the original Raptor and T-Rex beat the thing in the end, because it's a representation of actually making the movie. And I think that's the way to make it cool. I think that's the way to kind of acknowledge what you're doing. You know what I mean?
To kind of be meta about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and kind of be like, I know this is, what are we doing?
Yeah, exactly. But like, I feel like a lot of the new filmmakers, I'm not sure if you saw Godzilla -1.
Oh yeah, it's awesome.
Fucking awesome.
I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, it's like Godzilla 46 or whatever. But still.
Yeah, exactly.
And I might have undershot that one as well.
Yeah.
But still amazing, man.
Oh, it was great. I couldn't believe it. I mean, the idea that they made a movie that the central theme is that this kamikaze pilot feels guilty for not committing suicide is so crazy as a storyline. But then, of course, like, the effects in it are so cool. There's such a killer blend of practical stuff. Yeah, it's funny because I went to go see that with my buddies Walt and Rupert, and we were kind of like, yeah, we'll see what this is. We don't really know. I didn't even know do you know what the title means?
I think what it means is Japan was already at 0.
Yes, that's what it means.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I don't know if they made that clear at all in the movie.
Not at all. I had to look that up. I think the third interview was when I'm like, okay, so that's what it means.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was great. It was killer.
So good, man. It had like a $10 million budget.
That's the thing,
too.
It's amazing. I honestly, it's really tough because I feel like I'm, it's pretty cliched, and I'm parroting a lot of other people's thoughts, but like practical effects, limited budget, necessity is the mother of invention. And so that kind of stuff, I think, is what makes things feel authentic and genuine a lot of times. So that's really where my mind goes for filmmaking and what like I would like to work on. You know what I mean? And it's hard because those bigger budgets and those huge movies, the budget feels limitless for the most part. And because of that, there is no necessity. You just go, we'll do this perfectly in post. We'll do this. And I'm just like, man, I so much prefer the thing of like Godzilla -1, Monkey Man, those kind of things where people really had to figure out how they're going to do stuff to make it work,
Yeah, and I think Godzilla -1 is like a shining example of that. And I think like, because you look at Godzilla X Kong, and it's just a 2.5 hour video game cutscene.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
I know, yeah.
Where I think, for me, my favorite practical effects are like The Thing.
The Thing is my favorite.
Eraserhead, I think, is the best example of it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're a fan of Lynch.
I like David Lynch. I want to get more into David Lynch, but like The Thing is like I consistently say it's my number one favorite thriller, and I think it's my favorite use of practical effects.
Yeah, when the head's like stretching off the body, like that's so. I saw it in theaters recently. Amazing, man. But I think
it's so good. I actually found out an interesting fact about The Thing recently.
Oh yeah.
So Quentin Tarantino's Hateful Eight is very influenced by The Thing. And there's a video online you can watch that's all the mirrored shots that are the same as The Thing, and it's it's very similar. It's paranoia, who do we trust, people just stuck in the house. I just found out the guy that wrote the music for The Thing. You would think it's John Carpenter because he writes his own music for a lot of movies, but it actually wasn't. It was a different guy. Quentin Tarantino contacted him when he made Hateful Eight, and he used all the unused music for The Thing in Hateful Eight as the score of Hateful Eight.
Really?
Which is really cool. Really, really interesting thing that ties those two films together even more than you'd expect.
Yeah.
Because it's a very 1982. It's a very 1982 score. So the idea of bringing that into a movie that was made, I don't know, in 2010 or whatever it was, 2011, is so cool. I love that.
Well, Tarantino loves vintage filmmaking. And 80s, I guess, isn't really vintage in terms of all of filmmaking.
It is. I mean, it is now.
Yeah.
I think the 80s stuff has such a clear aesthetic a lot of the times that it almost pulls it even more towards that,
Yeah.
Feeling like it's a vintage thing because it has a feel.
Where it's obviously in the decade it's in.
Yes,
Where
exactly.
Today, I feel like with the use of like a lot of color grading and just like everyone's a lot more creative now.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's very different now.
I think it's really tough to tell the trappings of your current decade of music, whatever, all that stuff, because you're still in it. And then when you get out of it, you can see it. Because I remember like I was, by the end of the 90s, I was like 17 at 1999. And so it's like feeling like the 90s had an aesthetic at that point in time would be like, no, what do you mean? It's just normal. But now that we're removed and that is nostalgic and there's like styles from the 90s that have come back, now you can go, oh, there was an aesthetic for sure that I didn't realize because I was just part of it, And I think that's similar for film now.
Yeah, and I think like, to kind of go off your point, it's like you don't really see it when you're in the decade.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's hard. It's impossible. You're wearing MC Hammer pants and you're like, what are you talking? You have a high top fade. You're like, no, this is just how we're always going to be.
We're like, I watched Transformers. I'm like, yep, that's 2008.
No, that's true. When you watch like Resident Evil, like the original ones, stuff like that, you're like, okay, Fast and Furious, this definitely feels like 2001 or whatever the hell it was. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's really funny. No, that's true. That's
for me though, like best use of practical effects, I'm not sure if you've seen Eraserhead.
I haven't seen Eraserhead.
But the baby, apparently the only reason that David Lynch hasn't admitted to this is because like it's absolutely illegal. But apparently for the baby, they used a lamb fetus
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Because David Lynch was just a fucking maniac.
Oh, I know. I know.
The movie took like 6 years to make too.
I want to get more into it. I remember seeing Blue Velvet when I was like probably when I was in film school. I went to school for film. I shouldn't even say film school. I went to school for film at Rhode Island College, and I watched it then. And I was like, I appreciated some of it, but I was like, oh, this isn't for me. And I kind of I have a conflicted relationship with movies that are so open that you're not really sure if you even are getting what they want to say. Have you seen the movie Enemy? I think it's Enemy.
No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And there's like, does he have a duplicate? The spiders. It's just those movies I have a conflicted relationship with, where it's almost like you ever have things that you're like, I do respect this, but it's not what makes me excited for this genre. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I feel about some of that stuff. But I haven't seen Eraserhead. I do want to see Eraserhead for sure.
Yeah, well, David Lynch definitely has like those films where like after you watch it, you feel like you have to shower. You know? What I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, even Blue Velvet is a little like
It's heavy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I know other stuff of his from references on other shows. Like I remember The Simpsons reference Twin Peaks a couple times. And
They?
I was like, what is this from? Yeah, they had Lisa as a backwards talking character in one of the episodes.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was from Who Shot Mr. Burns, maybe. When they were trying to figure out who it was and stuff like that. And so like you find out about these key moments and scenes and stuff like that from other culture and like I other pop culture, and I would love to go back and watch a lot of David Lynch stuff. For sure.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff, but I think like in terms of filmmaking, like he had such an impact.
Yeah, oh for sure.
On films.
For sure.
Yeah. But like again, like he was kind of just doing his own thing with Eraserhead, and I think like that kind of just to bring it back to like what it is today in terms of putting content out.
Yeah.
You've totally like pretty much the Patreon for Tuesdays with Stories. You're completely responsible for building that up.
Well, it's so funny because it's so fun. That's such a funny thing that happened, because what happened was I was listening to Tuesdays with Stories as a fan. And I kept thinking, I'm like, oh, these guys talk just like me and my friends. They remind me so much. I love Mark Norman and Joe List as comics at the time. And the pandemic hit. And I had been working with this other podcast, Tell 'em Steve Dave, for years, which is Quinn from Impractical Jokers and Walt and Brian from Comic Book Men. And we have a really successful Patreon. And with the Tuesdays with Stories guys, Mark and Joe, they were like, hey, we can't tour right now. The pandemic is happening. All we have is our Patreon. And I was on their Patreon as like a supporter, just to be like, oh, let me contribute $3 a month, whatever. Just because I'm like, I like this podcast and I want these guys to get an income from it. And their Patreon was pretty like bare bones. They had a lot of Zoom episodes at the time. They weren't coming out with episodes that often. It was very all over the place. Whereas the Tell 'em Steve Dave Patreon that I was part of, insanely organized. A new episode every Tuesday, extremely highly produced episodes, big cast, and different limited merch. And I kind of reached out to Mark and Joe, and I was like, hey, I think I could really help you make this Patreon more lucrative, specifically because you're saying the only thing you have as an income is this thing. So maybe we can make it better and get more people on it. And all my ideas, Mark called me, I remember, and I didn't know them at all. I had no contact with them really. I think at the time Joe had come on my podcast one time, and he's a Boston guy. He was in Rhode Island, so he came on. And I reached out to Mark, and I finally got him to call me back. I still have the voicemail that he left me. It's really funny. And he's like, all right. He's like, let's talk about what you want to do. And I said, let me come to New York for 2 days. You don't have to pay me. I'll pay for everything. I'll make a couple projects with you, and if you like them, then hire me. And if you don't, that's no problem. And so I went there, and we filmed a couple things. And the first time I saw them, I went to Mark's apartment, and I had a list of all the shows I wanted to do on Patreon and all the ideas that I had for Patreon. And I think for the next 2 years, we basically did exactly that kind of stuff. And we basically tripled the Patreon in that time.
Wow.
Yeah, we came in, I think I came in and we were making a certain amount of money. And by that bench point, this benchmark, we had tripled that amount. which was really, really awesome because as much as you want to be like, oh man, a good idea will translate to, success. Not the case, as I'm sure you know. It's like I was like this, Hockey Sets, the documentary series. I'm like, this would be cool and fun. I hope people want to sign up to see it, but it worked really, really well. And after we got to that point, we kind of changed things around. I think Joe and Mark wanted to, they don't want to spend as much time doing podcast-based content or Patreon-based content as they do on their own stand-up comedy. And obviously the pandemic went away too during that time. So we're not doing as much of that produced stuff anymore. I wish we were. I wish we were doing Hockey Sets all the time. I wish we were doing it. Like my pitch would be to do an episode of that a month, as then have the other 3 bonuses per month be the different ideas I came up with for we had different shows. Like they would do like Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm watch-alongs because they really love that stuff and they talk about it constantly. I would find old clips of their old stand-up podcast appearances, like whatever they filmed, and I'd make them watch it from like 10 years previous, and they cringed the whole time, and people loved it. There's a couple different shows that I was pitching, and I'm like, let's do those 3 weeks a month and do the Hockey Sets 1 week a month as our documentary series. And unfortunately, we don't really do that as much as I'd like, but hopefully some of that is going to come back. But yeah, we were able to triple the Patreon with all those ideas, and it's like, I'm very, very, very proud of that, and I'm very happy that they let me do this documentary series with them, because now it's like I got so much experience doing documentary film work, because it's like I think we've produced like 5.5 hours of documentary material, like finalized documentary material, because it's a series.
Wow.
And so now that's a big thing to have in my reel and my resume, and that has led to me working with different people and kind of help me move up a little bit. But I wish I was still doing that with Mark and Joe. We're just not doing it as much as I wish.
Yeah, they're very busy currently. So was that like you're pretty much in like with the industry?
Basically, I mean, it's funny because what happened was, see, it's so weird because I was doing stuff that like in my head, we're living in a world now where it's like I'm doing this thing and I put it out and I see how people respond and there's these numbers and these likes and blah blah blah. But when I was working on film projects at first, it was like we're doing this to put on VHS tapes. We were selling them in my high school. Like it was crazy. I was, VCR to VCR copying them and stuff like that. And so for me, I was making film projects for a long time completely independently without really even paying attention whatsoever to how are people seeing this? How's this going to get out there? I was in a band for 15 years. The band's technically not dead. It's just that I live in New York now. The pandemic really stopped us from playing shows, so we kind of stopped.
So you guys are all pretty much separated?
Yeah, I mean, they're all in Rhode Island, and like I'd love to play again. The problem is like kind of setting up like practices and all that kind of stuff when I'm back and forth. But to build the band, we did comedy videos. That was kind of our signature thing for years, and we just did that completely independently. And what happened was my first transition over to anything even remotely like serious was that podcast, Tell 'em Steve Dave, with Quinn and Brian and Walt. They were doing a live show in Brooklyn, I believe. No, they were doing it at the Gramercy in Midtown, and in Manhattan, I should say. And they never do live shows ever. Like they were a podcast at this point, maybe for 7 years, and had done like a small run of live shows. And that's it, because Walt hates to do live shows. And when I saw that they were doing this, I reached out and I was like, hey, I'm Chuck. I didn't know them at all. I was like, I think you should film this. Like, you should put this out in some way. Like, you never do live shows. People were flying in from like all over the world to go see it because they have a lot of international fans. It just kind of happened that way. And I didn't get any response from them. I reached out to the Impractical Jokers manager, Dexter. And he was like, yes, we want you to come. And they didn't tell me until like I had 24 hours before the show.
Wow.
So I had to like get my girlfriend at the time and my buddy Brad, who do not have filmmaking experience. And I had to give them like a crash course because we had to get, 3 cameras, all the stuff. And it was like a lot. But we got down there and we filmed it. And that was like really like my first, I'm like, okay, I'm working with Quinn from Practical Jokers, these guys from Comic Book Men. That's a cool step. Now I know these guys a little bit. Let's see if this goes anywhere. Walt had some more ideas for film projects, so we kept working on that. And then Comic Book Men was canceled by AMC. And so Walt was like, we're going to start a Patreon. Do you want to be part of it? And so then it became, we had to do constant film work for the Patreon. And so now I'm working with them more. And this is more in this indie DIY way. But working with them expanded to me working with Kevin Smith, because I was doing, I think I would run into him here and there, but I was doing a documentary about the closing of Jay and Silent Bob's Secret Stash at 35 Broad Street. They moved the store. And when I did that documentary, we were all really happy with it. So I sent it to Kevin. And that's kind of when Kevin started talking to me. And then also Quinn from Impractical Jokers was also part of it. And he was kind of in and out because he's the most busy and the most, his calendar is crazy. But he started becoming really, really appreciative of the work. And he was really happy with it and impressed with it, I guess. And so it was kind of Kevin and Quinn at the same time from the work on Tell 'em Steve Dave that pushed me into like the space of like, oh, you could possibly work on a TV thing or possibly work on a movie thing. And
wow.
Yeah, it was really cool. And it took several years of a lot of hours and projects to kind of get to that place. And then also through Tell 'em Steve Dave, I met Brian Nichelle, the guy I was talking about earlier, the director, and he hired me to go to Ohio to shoot the sizzle reel for that micro wrestling with Little People Wrestling. And it got picked up by Discovery Channel. So now that's kind of another like feather in my cap that I can put on the resume. And plus it's like people like Mark and Joe have such big names. And now I'm like, well, here's all this documentary stuff that I filmed with Mark Normand. And I film, these live Gramercy shows with Mark, Joe, Dan Soder, Ari Shafir, Sal Volcano, Robert Kelly, all these, all these different people. So now I have this reel. Oh, and I eventually, so it was crazy. This is, I guess, the other part of it. During the pandemic, my mom texted me and she's like, hey, I was just watching Jimmy Fallon and Mike Birbiglia was on, who is a comic that we both really like. And she's like, and his podcast studio is in Providence, Rhode Island, which I thought was really strange because I know he's based in New York. And I reached out to Mike or his brother, Joe, I should say, who I know is a big part of his career. And I was like, hey, if you need any help, I do a lot of podcast stuff. I do documentary stuff. And they were like, yeah, maybe we'll talk to you one day. And like years went by and eventually they were like, hey, we're back in Brooklyn now. Are you still interested in working with us? And I'm like, I'm actually in Staten Island now. So they called me over and I started working with Mike Birbiglia on his podcast. And then the first time I worked with him, he's like, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to CBS today and we're going to film in Drew Barrymore's dressing room. We're doing an episode with her. And I was like, oh, weird, but cool. And I went with him and I did that. And we were leaving and Drew was like, she's like, where do you live? And I said, Staten Island. She was very nice, very sweet. And she's like, maybe we'll be in contact. And in my head, I was like, okay. And in my head, I was like, what are you talking about? For what? And then I was hit up by CBS to direct the pilot of her podcast. So that was kind of, it's just like this weird thing where it's like, I think my concept of how to move forward is like, just reach out to someone like slightly, like, wherever you can reach, the highest you can reach, let's say, and just work with them and do the best job you can possibly do. And then if that's involved with other people, try to work with them and say, here's the work I did with this person you're, affiliated with. And that has been what has let me kind of, move up a little bit here and there.
Yeah, just network up the ladder pretty much.
And it sucks because like networking to me is like, I'm like, ugh, it makes me want to, it makes my stomach turn to think about that term. And when I was in the band, never thought about it for a second. And we played a lot of big shows with a lot of big artists. And I'd be like, nope, get there, sound check, green room, kill the set. I don't even think about talking to the other bands. Like, because like if they're engaging me and they want to, cool. But a lot of times they're busy. They're like tired. They want some space in their own green room. Like, I'm like, just leave them alone. Let them go do their own thing. But now I know, looking back, I should have been trying to like become friends with all these people. But I just never thought about it at the time. And now I'm like, oh, I guess that's a thing I have to think about. And I've been trying to do that for the past like 7 or 8 years, I guess.
Yeah, it's every industry, honestly. I was kind of the same thing with comedy where I'm like, I just want to go to the show, be in my head about my set.
You don't want to bother any. For me, the biggest thing is I don't want to bother that person.
Yeah.
Even if it's like, hey, what's up? I'm Chuck, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to do that. I don't want to make this person think about that. I work with so many performers and I perform. And I know that it's like, you just want to be relaxed. You just want to be chilled out. I don't want to make this guy, I don't want to make the gym class heroes Be like, who are you? Wait, what is happening? Like, I'm trying to hang out with my girlfriend. I haven't seen her. I don't want to bother anybody. That's my biggest thing. It's weird because it's the anti-network thing. It's like, I just want to completely keep my mouth shut and not get in anyone's way. But it's like, how are you memorable if that happens? How are you ever gonna, you know what I mean? So it's very tough.
Exactly, and it's something that, like, you know, and I hate the term. I'm in the same boat.
Yeah,
because I'm like kind of introverted as well.
Yeah,
and I don't like kind of like, I know you have no idea who I am.
Exactly. It's like I don't want to. It's so funny too because I also have that with just like, you ever like go somewhere and someone's like, we're gonna meet the band, we're gonna meet the comic, we're gonna meet this thing. I'm like, I don't need to. I'm like, what am I gonna say to them in 5 seconds that is gonna be unique or memorable? I have a buddy his name is, they call him Jimmy the Hair Guy, because on Tell 'Em Steve Dave, there was a long running joke where Quinn cut a lock of his hair and he gave it to one of the guys. It's a long story, but he gave it to one of the guys involved in the podcast that needed his teeth fixed. And he said, you can sell this on eBay, use the money to get your teeth fixed. And the guy had it available in the, to be sold for $2,000 for years and years and years. And this fucking weirdo goblin dude named Jimmy came in one day, because where we film, we have our recording studio and we also have a store attached to it with all our merch with Tell 'Em Steve Dave. Wow. Yeah, it's really cool. You can actually go visit it.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's great. And this guy Jimmy came in today and he bought the hair for $2,000. Insane.
Damn.
And the guys were really surprised someone actually bought it. So they said, come on the show. And since then, I've become really close to him. He's one of my close friends. And the guys, he's been involved in stuff like that. He's a very nice guy. And he's pretty hilarious. Man, why the hell did I start talking about this? I lost it. Oh, yeah. So he wants to meet. His whole thing, like, his name is Jimmy the Hair Guy. That's his tag on Instagram, Twitter. If you look, all he does is meet people. And I'm not going to name names. He meets the most meaningless people.
I know who you're talking about. I know exactly who you're talking about.
He's a juggalo. Yeah. He was just on Howard Stern recently, randomly. It was crazy. He's a very weird little weasel cockroach guy. Just gets in everywhere. But all he cares about is he meets everybody. It's like, it's funny because I don't want to be mean to anybody that he's met, but he'll fly to fucking Hawaii to meet, the third Beethoven. You know what I mean? Like, he's crazy. And so we recently went, he's like, I want to go to Paul Scheer's book signing in Brooklyn. And I was like, all right, yeah, let's go. And like, I love Paul Scheer. I think he's great. I love How Did This Get Made? And so I was like, okay. I got the book. And at the end, he's like, we're going to meet him now. I'm like, okay. And like, I'm not really interested in this. We go up to Paul Scheer and Jimmy just fucking spills his guts for like literally 15 minutes. Like, oh my God, went to this thing. Yeah, he's from Massachusetts. I do the exact same thing. Like, oh my God, this was so important to me. He does it for 15 minutes. He's like, yeah. Paul Scheer's like, Goes on and on and on. And then Paul Scheer looks at me. I go, I'm just a regular fan. I don't know. I like your stuff. I don't know. Great. This is fun. And that's it. And like, that's all I got. And I'm like, I know, like, I'm sure it's nice to hear, I'm a fan of yours. I love your work and stuff like that. But to me, it's like, they're going to get that from a million people. I don't need to contribute to that. I don't need to bother this person. I don't need to take up their time. So it's really hurt me in the long run for networking stuff. Even times when I've been around Kevin Smith for years before we actually started talking and working together, like, I would just be like, nah, I'm not going to bother him. He's got a million people up his ass. He's doing a signing that's supposed to be 2 hours long and it's taken 4.5 hours. I'm not going to add to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel very similar to you with that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And like, it's so funny, man, because I didn't know who you were talking about. I think a year ago, he added me on LinkedIn.
Wow.
Because there was a phase when I'm like, you know what? Let me like try to like make some real money.
What a fool. It's like, wait, you love art? Let's try.
like I can relate, man, because like I've met a lot of bands and stuff.
Yeah.
Have you ever had like any bad encounters with celebrities?
Well,
do you not want to?
I can't talk about the biggest ones. But
you don't have to say a name. I guess.
I'll tell you a really funny story about Drew Barrymore and Kevin Smith.
Oh yeah,
this is a great one. And it's weird because like I haven't worked with Kevin super recently, not in the past like this. I haven't worked with Kevin recently. But a while ago, when I worked with Drew Barrymore. she was asking me about the different people I worked with, and I was like, I work with Mark Norman, blah blah blah, and I said Kevin Smith, and she goes, oh, Kevin Smith. I'm like, yeah. She goes, you know, Kevin Smith one time said on a TV show that he'd like to tie me to a rusty radiator and throw me off a ship. And I was like, and it's like, I know Kevin, and Kevin is extremely positive, especially in public, by the way. Especially, like, I can't even imagine him saying that at all. Maybe maybe in a joking sense with his closest friends, but in public on a TV show, he's just not the guy to make fun of other people or come at them.
He seems very wholesome.
Yeah, and he's also like, he's just like, if he doesn't like a thing, he's just not going to talk about it. He's not going to be like, this actor sucks, this actress sucks, this movie. He's not like that. He's just not. And I was like, that's really weird. I'm like, that doesn't sound like him to me. And she's like, ask him. And I was like, okay. So, you know, I go work with Kevin. I'm working with him at Smodcastle, which was, now it's a movie theater in Atlantic Highlands. But before that, it was a really small black box theater in the same building as the Quick Stop from Clerks. Mm-hmm. And so we were working, we did a lot of work there, which was really cool because it was like a 50-seat room, and, you know, he would just be doing podcasts all the time. So we were backstage, we were hanging out, and I was like, hey man, I'm like, so get this. I'm like, I was just working with Drew Barrymore, and she said you said this thing, and he's like, no. And I was like, that's what I told her. I'm like, I don't know. He goes, where did I say it? Where did she say I said it? I said, it was when you were hosting, you're filling in for someone on the Roger and Ebert show, and you were talking about her movie Music and Lyrics. And he's like, let's look. Can we look it up? And I was like, I don't know. I pulled out my phone, I looked it up on YouTube. And so me and him are watching my phone, or watching his whole segment talking about music and lyrics. And he was kind of a dick. Like in the beginning, he was like, man, he's like, I'd like to, he wanted to fly somewhere and punch someone in the face for some reason, that because they liked the movie or something like that. And he's like, oh no, he's like, maybe I did say it. We're watching it. And the whole segment goes by, and he's like, and he didn't say it. He didn't say anything like that. And I was like, oh, that's weird. He's like, wow. He's like, I didn't say that. And I was like, yeah, I guess you didn't. He goes, give me your phone. And I'm like, oh, I don't have Drew Barrymore's personal cell phone number. He's like, no. He's like, just give me your phone. I gave it to him, and I have this video. And he's filming. He goes, hey Drew, I'm with Chuck. And I'm like, why am I in the middle of a beef between Kevin Smith and Drew Barrymore? And he's like, I'm with Chuck. You told him this thing. He goes, it's not true. We just watched it. He goes, but you know what is true? He's like, you came to the Dogma premiere for free. You were complaining, and you were being. And I was like, why is this happening? Like, there's no way that I'm going to be a winner in this situation. It's only going to ostracize me from somebody or both. And he's like, show this to her. And I was like, oh my God. And I was very hesitant. I was like, I'm not going to show it to her. And I talked about it somewhere casually on a podcast or something that I thought it was funny. And someone reached out to me, and they were like, he did say that. He's like, later in the episode, and I should have thought about this. He goes, they talked about Black Snake Moan with Christina Ricci and Samuel Jackson, where she's tied to a radiator. Yeah. And because of that, he references, he wished he could tie Drew Barrymore to a radiator and throw her. Okay. And so that's why it happened later in the episode. And I was like, oh shit. And I eventually did tell Kevin, I'm like, you did say that later in the episode. He's like, did you show that video to her? I was like, no, I never showed it. So I never showed it to her. But there was this mini feud for like a couple weeks that I was like, I don't want to be part of this. I'm not interested in being part of this. Besides that, we had a fight with Tom from the band Streetlight Manifesto that was on film. Yeah, and it was not good.
On film?
On film, yeah. I was filming. They didn't know I was filming, but there was a big argument between those guys and my band. And I think it's funny because I wasn't the one that said anything to start it. It was my old bassist, and he's like a complete asshole. And I think it was his fault, but Tom was a real dick. But I think that historically, people kind of know that Tom from Streetlight Manifesto has been really difficult with a lot of people. Obviously, there's a huge split between Catch 22 and all this stuff. So I think that wasn't surprising. And then the only one that was real that I think I can talk about now is Meatloaf. Was a real dick to me and my buddy Brad. Yeah, we were supposed to moderate, because one of the things that we do in conjunction with Funbearable and with our old podcast, the Chuck and Brad podcast, is we moderate at Comic-Cons. And so that's been awesome. Like I moderated for like Christina Ricci, the cast of the new It movie, like a bunch of people from The Office. It's been really, really, really fun, and everyone's very nice. I actually just did. It's so nerdy. It was the voices of Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and April O'Neil from the original Turtles series.
Wow.
Yeah, that was amazing. And at the same one, my buddy Brad did the entire cast of Futurama. It was incredible. It was those are all great. But one time we were supposed to moderate for Meatloaf and Barry Bostwick, who played Brad in Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yep.
And and we had a million panels that weekend. We were moderating I think we did 9 over the course of 72 hours, which is a lot because you do a lot of research and you plan a lot of stuff. And Meatloaf was and Meatloaf had issues. I think he had pain issues. I don't know. He's backstage and he's like, "Where are the moderators? Get rid of them! Get rid of them!" And we were like, it's funny because my buddy Brad is a mouse of a man. He's the most soft-spoken guy ever, and I'm kind of the one that's a little bit more, open and maybe abrasive in some ways. And I was tired as shit, and I was like, I don't care. I'm like, I don't care if we're not moderating this panel. And Brad was just like, "I'm your moderator. Who do you think you're talking about?" And I was like, shut the fuck up. And he's like, and Meatloaf is like, "I don't need a moderator, blah, blah." So Meatloaf and Brad are kind of getting into it and kicking dirt, an umpire and stuff. And I'm like, why is this happening? And then Barry Bostwick stands in and he gets behind Meatloaf, who is shorter and he's kind of hunched over too. And Barry Bostwick is like, "Just come out on stage. Don't worry." Meatloaf's like, "Don't come out on stage." And Barry Bostwick's like, "Come out on stage." And I'm like, I'm not getting in between these two people.
Yeah.
The last person who did that was Frankenfurter. We know that ended. But I was like, I'm not going out there. And so they went out. And it's funny because your job as moderator, I think, is to open, kind of get people excited, clapping. And you want to get some colorful, interesting questions going and some thoughtful questions that they can the celebrities can talk for a little bit. And you do that for the first half of your panel. Then you call to questions, and it's your job as a moderator to kind of be the bad guy, where if someone's taking too long, you got to be like, "Oh, we're going to move on." Or "Hey, we have 5 minutes left. We have one question left." You got to do that so that the celebrity person, whoever it is, doesn't have to do that. And they also don't have to pay attention to the time and do all that stuff. And he's like, "We don't need a moderator." And I wasn't going to have this spiel with him of you might want one because otherwise it's going to be annoying. And they went out there. I was like, I'm not going to go against his wishes. I'm not going to go out there. And they went out there and they went way over time. They fucked up the schedule. And it was I don't know. I don't know what happened. But I will say, my mom loves Rocky Horror Picture Show. And she had an original vinyl from when it came out. And I brought it. And I was like, "Can I get this signed? You're supposed to, I kind of, played it up. I was like, man, I was supposed to moderate." It was like Meatloaf's handler. Anyways.
I've done that a few times.
I can handle Meatloaf. And so I was like, I was supposed to moderate. He kicked me out. I don't know. I was hoping to get this sign for my mom. So because of that, she's like, I'll make sure he signs it.
Cool.
And so he did. So that's fine. Water under the bridge. He's passed on. We talked about it though on the podcast right afterwards because we think it's funny. It's a funny story. We got a lot of trouble for talking about it. I think at this point we're okay. And it's, I think we're okay now to talk about it, but for a while it was a little hairy. But yeah, those were rough. I'm trying to think. Everyone else is pretty cool. It's funny because any of the stuff that happens at cons, I guess I can't really talk about because I'll get in trouble for it. Everyone's been pretty cool. I mean, the truth is, behind the scenes, in terms of working with bigger names, all these different people I mentioned, different people will treat you as you're garbage to me or you're meaningless to me, and they'll just lie to your face. They'll be like, "Hey, I remember one guy I worked with who's pretty high up. I won't say his name. He was just like, "Hey, listen," he's like, "Can you train this guy to also do your job with filming this stuff?" And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "This is just for if you're not here, you're not available, because I do have some conflicts with filming and stuff." He's like, "He can fill in when you're not here." He goes, "But I promise you," he looked me in the eye. He's like, "Hey, listen," he's like, and this guy has a reputation, he's supposed to be his reputation outwardly as a persona is very earnest and nice. He looks me in the eye, he goes, "Listen," he's like, I'm never going to not call you and just use him. I'll always call you first, but I just want to have you train him. Never call me again."
Wow.
And it was just a lie to my face. And I was like, that was pretty shitty. And then later on, I was like, "Hey, man," I'm starting this podcast. I was wondering if you would come on. You're going to be in Rhode Island and stuff like that. And I kind of, without saying it, wanted to be like, I worked for you and you lied to me and never called me again for no reason at all. And I was like, "Will you come on the podcast?" He's like, "No." And I was like, I thought that would be him making up for being kind of a dick, but But again, if I say his name, then
well, I feel like also like Senior Discount and stuff. You're kind of in that pop punk circuit.
Yes,
and I feel like some of those guys can be very hit or miss.
Well, it's weird because we played with a lot of. For some reason, even though we were pretty much a pop punk band, we were honestly, I kind of think of us a little bit close to like NoFX because we did a lot of thrashy punk stuff, and the poppy stuff, and that's kind of what NoFX does. But we were paired up with a lot of ska bands, so it's like. We played with Big D and the Kids Table. They've always been really nice. Dave, we went to his house in New Hampshire and we did like a 2-hour podcast about his whole life. And it was like awesome.
Wow.
Chris from Less Than Jake. We went to New York. He was our first big interview. He was amazing. The drummer of Less Than Jake eventually signed my band to Paper and Plastic Records. So Less Than Jake, really, really nice. I met a bunch of the guys from Real Big Fish. They were all really nice. And we played with Streetlight Manifesto, Catch-22, Leftover Crack.
Nice.
Do you know them?
Love them.
Choking Victim, Leftover Crack. It's so funny because people look at me and they're like, I'm open about it. I'm like Blink-182 and Green Day. I love those bands. I think they're incredible musicians. Like Green Day's live show, I don't know other bands that can rival their tightness and their level of energy and how they do this thing for 2.5 hours. They're incredible. Blink-182, I'm so in awe of their songwriting and the idea that somehow their personas have just like continued on and people love them more than ever now, even though they got famous in 1999.
Yeah.
And like people kind of would look at me as like, oh, you're in this punk band. You love Blink-182 and Green Day. I'm like, yeah, but I also love the Suicide Machines, Leftover Crack, all these different bands that are like, Days and Days, these crazy little. Like my ex-girlfriend used to describe Days and Days as it sounds like a bunch of fleas started a band together, and that's how Leftover Crack is too. But they were cool. They were really nice to us. I mean, it honestly in the music world, I think everyone's been pretty cool. It's funny because I can't talk about a lot of the stuff that's not. But some bands are way more corporate that you'd think they're cool, and they're just like, hey, you need to buy onto this show or pre-sale ticket, and it's just like, okay, dude.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in metal as well.
Yeah,
and I feel like it's good, I feel like a lot of people are very tunnel vision with music taste.
Yeah,
where like you have to kind of be into everything to really see the full picture.
That's how I think too, and it's fun too because. As a now, there's a huge amount of people on YouTube that are basically like doing like, they do all metal covers of stuff, they do all punk covers of stuff, acoustic covers, and I've always loved that stuff even before there was really a place to explore it. Like I was getting into music, I got into Green Day probably in like '96 when I was like 12, and I would kill for like acoustic versions of those songs at the time because I love that stuff. But when you do that, and someone takes, for example, Shake It Off by Taylor Swift, and they do a metal version of it, it does break down the barriers of, you're like, well, metal is this, Taylor Swift is this. And then when you see these things brought together, you're like, oh, actually, this part really works. Oh, and they actually added this to this part. That's kind of a foundation of like this type of music, but it really works in this part. And so you start kind of seeing... My phrase was always fuck the aesthetic. I don't care about the aesthetic. There are some killer disco songs.
Yeah,
like, you know what I mean?
I agree.
Like, what are you gonna do? Like it's just songwriting. I think is pretty universal, and like you can write a song that's way poppier or way more punk rock or way more thrashy, whatever it is. But a lot of times, the melodies, the harmonies, and the way the chord progressions and the way music is written, a lot of it is going to be similar throughout the genres. The difference is just the instrument and the way it's played.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's that different.
For sure, man. Like there's metal bands I know that like I can see a riff and it translates to classical music.
Absolutely.
And I know they were very much inspired by that classical piece.
Yeah.
So it's really, really cool, man.
It's really interesting. I love, because for me, you ever hear the Atreyu album, Suicide Notes and Butterfly Kisses?
Yep.
Like, so much of that's, like, I love that album. I love the screaming parts of it, but so much of the singing on that album, it just feels like older metal, like metal from like the 80s.
Like traditional.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even though it's in this new place that's supposed to be way thrashier, way crazier. But the guitar work on that album, it's like all that stuff does remind me of classical music. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Well, that's what's cool about bands today is you're seeing that in more newer artists. Like, for example, King Gizzard, where they put out a thrash metal album.
Yeah.
And then the next year they put out an R&B album.
Yeah, see, I love that. I think that's amazing.
And I think that's because of Spotify, because back in the day, like talking to all these bands, you're like, yeah, went to the record store, saw all the cool covers, bought those,
Yeah.
Where now it's like, a kid gets Spotify and they're listening to every genre ever. So when they start a band, I feel like a lot of bands, today are going to be a little more creative and are going to pick from a ton of influences.
I think they're exactly right. It's funny because I always tell people with Senior Discount, my band was like, like I said, we kind of were like, we did a lot of punk rock stuff that was like hard and thrashy, but then a lot of pop stuff. And I was like, we came up from a generation that was like raised on like TRL on MTV. Yeah. So you'd see Limp Bizkit, Blink-182, Backstreet Boys, Korn, Britney Spears, 50 Cent, Eminem, all this stuff back to back to back to back to back in the same place. And I think it pulls your brain in different directions, and it makes you see all this stuff with less of walls between these genres. And, I prefer that very much.
Well, I feel like nu metal also brought a lot of white people into rap.
Yeah, that's true. That's really interesting. You're right, because I'm thinking back, because I for sure was the right age for that rise of Limp Bizkit, Korn, all that kind of stuff. And it was so like, I remember the Anger Management tour, and I remember it was like, not only was it like Limp Bizkit and Eminem had similar fans, but then it would like branch out, and it's like, well, you're also liking Dr. Dre and Korn, and you're also liking Ice Cube and and Power Man 5000 at the time or whatever. And it became a weird little thing. You're right. That's funny. I never really thought about that before.
Yeah, bringing rap to the trailer parks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Kid Rock, stuff like that.
Yeah,
because Kid Rock and Eminem both came from Detroit, and they would do features with each other and stuff like that. But yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was definitely like and now it's fucking wild.
Yeah.
Now it's in music's so intertwined. You have rap artists doing country songs now.
Oh yeah.
It's a complete mess.
What's funny, because I think about like, I feel like when I was coming up, there was a lot, like every band I loved at some point was accused of selling out. Green Day, Blink, Real Big Fish is one of my favorite bands, ska band. Against Me is one of my top favorite bands, super accused of selling out. And I was like, I really don't feel like bands, I almost feel like it's pretty much impossible to really sell out. I mean, you can look at the band Sugar Ray and look at their stuff early, which is very thrashy and punk rocky, like, cash, I need some fucking cash. And then they went into like, every morning. And I'm like, even that, if Mark McGrath said to me, well, yeah, we made 2 albums like this, and then we noticed that this stuff was more popular, it'd be like, oh, it'd be really fun to experiment in that genre. How do you fault that?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you come against that and be like, oh, it's selling out? It's like, well, maybe they enjoyed making this music, and it was also more successful, so they went towards it. Like, what's wrong with that? How is that negative?
Yeah, it's really crazy, man, because people also like accuse Nirvana of selling out when they first signed to a major label before Nevermind.
Exactly. And it's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And same thing with Green Day, especially when I hate when people are like, they made a musical, American Idiot. I'm like, all the music on American Idiot is so based in the same stuff as Dookie and all the stuff that they got big with. It's not they didn't flip genres. They took what they did and just made it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's, when you see them now, I mean, I'm going to see them in Philly pretty soon. They're doing Dookie. The set is they're doing Dookie in full and then American Idiot in full.
Oh, wow.
Back to back.
Wow.
Every day, and it's Smashing Pumpkins and Rancid are opening.
Oh,
it's crazy.
Rancid, really?
Rancid and Smashing Pumpkins,
wow.
And they're doing baseball stadiums across the country.
Damn,
it's
man.
Incredible. And I was like, and they're playing 4 songs from their new album in between the 2 albums, but that's the 2 albums.
That'd be so crazy seeing Rancid in a stadium.
Oh my god, dude! And I'm like, man, Billy Joe helped them write Radio, so I'm hoping he comes out for that. And Tim Armstrong wrote, in Operation Ivy wrote Knowledge, so I'm hoping he comes out for that with Green Day at some point in time, But yeah, I know, I can't wait to go see it, and I really feel like I'm like, it's so weird to see people say, you need to be this, and if you you change a little bit, you're selling out or you're not. I'm like, dude, what do you think art is? What do you think any type of art is? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, Green Day I think, is very innovative.
Yeah.
Taking a very raw, and then bringing it to the most theatrical medium.
Yeah.
I thought it's very cool, and I think that's the purpose of art, to really branch out as much as possible, to where it used to be.
I also think, like, if you're a huge fan of any band and you really care about music, those bands are going to evolve. Like
Yeah.
you're not going to be like, yeah, these are the 11 albums they came out with and they all sound exactly the same. It's like, that would suck.
Yeah.
That would be shitty if that's what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to see the bands move forward and change and evolve.
As much as I love thrashy Metallica, I think it's cool how they have these 2 albums of kind of grungy, weird stuff, experimental.
Yeah.
Like, I like that instead of having a band that had a whole, like, an AC/DC discography.
Yeah.
And you think, well, what if they did kind of change it up or go this direction?
Exactly.
Worst comes to worst, just don't listen to the record. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think about that all the time. Like, I love, like, Blink-182 is my favorite. I think they're kind of looked at as, like, very, very poppy, almost boy band stuff because they were making fun of that stuff. It's almost like they got lumped in a little bit more. But if you really listen to Blink, their first 2 big albums were, like, super, super amateur, fast punk rock. Then they got into making the more polished pop punk stuff. Then they made a more polished version of it with this album, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, that's incredible. And then they went into like art punk, where they're like singing into bathtubs and doing 808 drops in their songs. And like the stuff that they eventually did, like, and Feeling This is the big single that would represent that first change into that, is really experimental and really different. And it's almost like, this is like anti-mainstream. If you look at the riffs and stuff and Feeling This, like, that shouldn't be a single, and that's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Because they're just breaking down the walls of what can be accepted into the mainstream culture.
Yeah.
I really look at it that way.
It's really cool, and it's not this very cookie cutter style of songwriting. It's really interesting, man.
It's funny because I think a lot of people hear like All the Small Things, which to me is like, the stuff that I don't listen to from Blink. And I'm like, listen to the album. Blink-182 self-titled is one full track all the way through, like cut into 13 pieces, and it's incredible. One song has a motif as the main guitar thing, and by the end it slows down, and then it becomes a different motif for a different song at the end of it. I'm like, that stuff is really intelligent and really developed, and kind of putting them in this mold where it's like, oh, they're just doing 4/4 verse chorus verse chorus verse chorus. It's like, that's not what they're doing at all if you actually listen to their albums. Yes, this is the single that was chosen 25 years ago for that one album by record executives, but think of their actual discography. I mean, it's the same with like Eminem, and it's like Real Slim Shady. I'm like, yeah, Real Slim Shady, but listen to his actual stuff. There's some songs where he goes for 6 minutes with no chorus, and he just raps the entire time.
Yeah.
It's incredible,
Yeah, insane stuff. A lot of people, like, you have to kind of judge the songwriter opposed to the song.
Yeah, I think so. Or get a full picture before you judge. It's
Exactly.
really how I feel.
Exactly.
It's almost like to me, listening to All the Small Things and judging Blink is like watching a trailer for Pulp Fiction and being like, here's what I think about Quentin Tarantino's filmmaking. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. To me, it's exactly the same.
Yeah, too bloody. Fuck that.
What's the story?
Yeah. But yeah, man, this was a ton of fun. Thank you for being on. Yeah.
Dude, this was great. I'm happy to come on anytime. Happy to have you on Funbearable sometime.
Would be honored, man.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah,
Ray
so
hilarious.
If there's anything we forgot to talk about or plug, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'd say, listen to Funbearable. It's funbearablepod.com and at funbearablepod on every social media channel. We're going to be promoting for that live show July 21st. It's a Sunday in East Providence, Rhode Island at the Comedy Connection. Amazing comedy club. Great guys. We really appreciate it. That's where we record. We record in the basement. We're little cockroaches. We're little comedy cockroaches. And it's going to be a really, really fun show. We'll be putting up clips and stuff on our social media channels to kind of show you what our live shows are like leading up to that. And obviously a new episode every week. We try to have guests on. We do a lot of weird stuff. This week, depending on when this comes out, this week one of my characters is coming back, Dr. Genius, where I bring a character to the table who just brings bad ideas for us to either incorporate in the podcast or possibly not. And the first time we did Dr. Genius, people really enjoyed it, and so we're bringing it back to do another one. My buddy Dave Case, he was in a band from around here called 10 Cent Short. He just wrote a theme song for Dr. Genius. So that's going to be on the Dr. Genius episode that's up. I'm sure it'll be up by the time this comes out. But check it out. Funbearable is the podcast.
Awesome. Make sure to check that shit out, Chuck.
Dude.
Great meeting you, man.
Great meeting you. I hope people know that we met 60 seconds before this recording started, because we just kind of sat down and fucking riffed and never stopped for a second.
I know.
I love that. It's great, man.
It was a great time, man.
Great to meet you. This is a great podcast.
Great meeting you. I'm Brandon Battick, and this is Disturbing the Priest.